Today is October 10th, a day that lives in infamy for many U.S. men's national team fans. 5 years ago today, in Couva, the U.S. men's national team lost 2-1 to Trinidad to miss out on the 2018 World Cup. Today, I want to take a look back at both that game and the performances leading up to it that led to us missing the World Cup. Remembering how we got into this situation, after losing the first two games of World Cup qualifying to Mexico and a drumming against Costa Rica, Jurgen Klinsmann was fired. The reasoning behind this firing was that Klinsmann had really lost the dressing room. Players wanted him gone, but I think the question remains why. And I think the answer is mostly in fragile egos. I think it first lies in Jurgen Klinsmann, the manager, and it was pretty apparent how bad things were on his side. The dressing room was lost completely, and a lot of that was him needing to be a leader in the squad. He famously cut Landon Donovan before the 2014 World Cup, and a move that I just look back on it, and it gets less and less justifiable every time I look at it. He wanted to make a statement to the team, and the only way he'd get the message across was sacrificing one of the most important players to the squad. He was an incompetent manager who felt the need to have his guys on the team. And let's keep in mind, he was tactically inept. However, the U.S. did kind of get results in that. A pretty decent 2014 World Cup and a couple of Gold Cup titles. Something that I found, especially when watching the U.S. team specifically, when there isn't a ton of talent in the squad, when a game opens up and becomes chaotic, we can do a lot better. We saw this recently at the 2021 Gold Cup, specifically in the semifinals and finals against Qatar and Mexico, where we were completely outplayed and outcoached, but some gritty performances led by guys like Matthew Hoppe, Miles Robinson, and Matt Turner led us to winning the tournament. And that kind of seems like that's what the team was doing. They were, because of, or maybe despite of Jurgen Klinsmann's tactics, they were doing all right. But when you're playing like that, results do matter. They had a terrible loss to Guatemala early in World Cup qualifying, and with a ton of players played out of position and questions had to be raised. After the loss to Mexico at home and the 4-0 loss to Costa Rica, the writing was on the wall and he had to leave. But I feel like there was a little bit more to those losses. Yes, the players weren't exactly put in position to succeed, but I feel like there was something wrong on the player side as well. By the time World Cup qualifying had started, I think the team had completely given up on Klinsmann. Bradley had wanted Klinsmann gone in 2015, according to a Ringer report, and there was talk of veteran player Timothy Chandler telling Bobby Wood, one of our younger strikers at the time, to sit out a game and not risk getting injured. And I think there was a feeling that this team had just given up, and a lot of that was down to the players' egos getting hurt. Klinsmann did a lot of things to get this group upset. He cut several team leaders from the group, he encouraged players to leave the MLS, and was giving MLS players a hard time, and he brought in several German players who walked into starting roles. And despite his faults, though, he was kind of right about this. We failed because the old guard was too old, and mediocre and uncreative MLS players, and I think if John Brooks was healthy, we'd qualify for that World Cup. But players' egos were hurt by this. Now, again, Klinsmann was completely incompetent and should have gone about this in a different way. He was terrible. I want to make that clear. But so is Greg Berhalter. And the current group of players leaves everything out on the field. But the guys in 2018, they were too good for it and just gave up. And I feel like that's kind of the way the players born from like a general 1987 to 1994-ish, 5-ish are of this team, and honestly, it still kind of hurts us. I feel like the squad gave up for that away game in Costa Rica, and should we have had 3 points or even 1 from that game, things would have been different. But because of that, a familiar face was brought in. Bruce Arena. Bruce Arena came back into the team. He was the manager in 2002 when the U.S. had a very good run, and in 2006 when they didn't, and Bruce Arena wanted to right that wrong of 2006, and familiarity resumed for the U.S. squad. Without any of those fragile European squads on the team, they could do what they love in CONCACAF and, oh, that's not right. Wait, there was a German on the team. Better get him out. But, things actually were looking a bit better now. We had some actual stars emerging, and the current generation of the U.S. had really broken through. Christian Pulisic at Dortmund Weston McKennie at Schalke, Tyler Adams at Red Bull, and things were coming along well. But only Pulisic got the call. See, Klinsmann really ruined the chemistry of the team, and Arena wanted it back. So he decided to keep the player pool limited. But I think the players knew that their spot on the team was guaranteed, and there was a ton of complacency within that squad. In addition, Arena's ego wasn't perfect either. He didn't like how Jeff Cameron didn't respect the abilities of his assistants, one of which being his son, and Jeff Cameron got benched. And keep in mind, John Brooks was injured at this time. So for our World Cup qualifying game, it was Omar Gonzalez. Tensions grew and he was deemed not good enough for the culture, his vibes weren't good enough, and he got benched. And then Omar Gonzalez scored for us in the wrong goal. And then another goal was conceded before halftime, and despite a dazzling performance from Christian Pulisic and some good efforts from Clint Dempsey, the U.S. lost the game and failed to qualify for the World Cup. There was complacency, poor management, and an overall lack of talent that had cost the team a spot in the World Cup. On the player side of things, Omar Gonzalez is the main scapegoat I find, but in that game, Tim Howard was equally bad. He's a hero and a legend for the USA squad, but he was well past his prime and should not have been in net. In addition, players that were supposed to be in their primes underachieved. Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore were already back in the MLS after somewhat promising starts to their overseas careers, and the rest of the squad just lacked talent. Matt Bessler, Villafania, and Paul Arriola were not good enough and still aren't good enough. Darlington Nagbe and Bobby Wood never really got the most out of their talents either. We were just starting to figure out that maybe DeAndre Yedlin wasn't going to be the player we thought he could be in the 2014 World Cup. And the lone bright spot was a young Christian Pulisic and maybe Clint Dempsey as a veteran off the bench. But looking back at that bench and looking at that squad in general, the complacency in that squad is so obvious and just a huge mistake. I mean, I mentioned in goal, Tim Howard, he's a legend, one of the best players to ever put on a national team shirt. But he was washed. And honestly, Nick Romito, Brad Guzan, they weren't doing their best either. Tim Miela was having a great season for Sporting Kansas City. Zach Steffen was breaking out in Columbus, and Ethan Horvath was actually playing regularly. But nobody could get a look. I already mentioned Jeff Cameron not being allowed in the squad. Tim Ream was there as well, but I don't think his not being there was that big a deal. Matt Miazga was having a very good year and would have helped out the squad. He was playing in the Chelsea reserves, Vitesse, and he was doing pretty well. And Cameron Carter-Vickers was establishing himself in Sheffield in the championship. There were signs that he wasn't ready. He was a very young player, but I think anything would have been an upgrade over Gonzalez or Bessler. Left back was a huge issue as well. I mentioned Villafania already. DeMarcus Beasley, he's a legend just like Howard, but I don't think he should have been there. Justin Morrow was actually playing very well. He literally scored a hat trick for Toronto the game before the international window, but he couldn't get a look in. And not for nothing, Jedi Robinson was actually playing as well. And just any of these moves, while they probably wouldn't have been too huge of an upgrade, it could at least get some life into this dying team. On the right, there were concerns about commitment from Timmy Chandler. Arena didn't want Johnson in the team, I guess. And we had an old Zusi backing up DeAndre Yedlin. Then in the midfield, there were a ton of players, but Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams should have been the team at the very least. On the wing, Julian Green was actually getting consistent game time for the first time in his career. And up top, anybody but Chris Wondolowski as a backup. CJ Sapong was having a very good year. Haji Wright was actually getting some time. Not Yazzie Zardes. I looked. He was playing right back at the time. I forgot about that part of his career. Looking back at this team, even from views at the time, considering injuries and who was actually playing, in goal, we probably should have gone with Zach Steffen or Ethan Horvath, or at least Miela at Sporting Kansas City. At center back, Matt Miazga would have been a great choice. Maybe Cameron Carter-Vickers or Jeff Cameron as another option. I think DeAndre Yedlin was probably the right choice out on the right. And on the left, though, probably would have gone with Morrow or even Jedi Robinson. In the midfield, I'd probably axe Bradley altogether. I'll be completely honest. I was never a fan of that guy, and I feel like he was one of the main culprits of the team's culture completely going down. But thankfully, you've got Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie you can put in the team. I'd probably keep Darlington Nagbe. He was a solid player. Christian Pulisic, you can keep him as like a 10. You go with like a 4-4-2 diamond. Then like Bobby Wood or either Clint Dempsey and Josie Altidore as the other striker. And if these changes sound like too radical, it's really not. The next month, the U.S. tied Portugal 1-1 with a lineup of Ethan Horvath in net, John Brooks and Matt Miazga, DeAndre Yedlin, Eric Lachig, I forgot about him being in the squad, Danny Williams, another guy who, man, he would have helped out as well, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Kellen Acosta, Juan Agudelo, and CJ Sapong. Then the game before the World Cup, the U.S. tied the world champion France team. They were coasting. They didn't want to get injured in the game before the World Cup. But still, that was an extremely talented team with Zach Steffen in goal, Matt Miazga, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Parker, forgot about him as well, Shaq Moore, Jedi Robinson, Will Trapp, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Bobby Wood, and Julian Green. Like, this team had the talent to succeed. Like, and you can say, oh, these guys weren't ready. Well, neither were the veterans. This team failed strictly because of the mismanagement of the squad. The player came places he was fanned by bad management and bad squad selection despite emerging talent. And honestly, you can have as bad as tactics as you want, but you should be able to beat Trinidad and Tobago. But why am I bringing up this right now? And I think it should be pretty obvious after the lineups we put on these friendlies. Similar problems have began appearing in the current U.S. team. In fact, they appeared this time last year in the match against Panama. And I think poor selection could get in the way of us succeeding at the World Cup. The manager's ego is getting in the way of us bringing in our best players, bad squad selection, and I feel like there's a worry of players starting to coast through games again and looking strictly ahead to the 2026 World Cup. I think these players are in the same position they were after that loss against Mexico under Jurgen Klinsmann. Right now, we can either make a point and throw away this opportunity that we have, or we can say, you know what, we're a talented team. Despite everything that's going against us, we are going to try our best, put our best foot forward, and just go at this World Cup. I mean, wacky things have happened for us at the World Cup before. They might be able to happen again. And we can try to make something happen with the talent that we have. And there is more than enough talent in this player pool to have a very good World Cup campaign. I look at that Welsh side, I look at that Iran team. Honestly, I look at that England team. We can beat all of them. Just like in 2016, 2017, we just have to call up the right people and put them on the field in a position to succeed. After that, we can sort out our future once the tournament is over. And yeah, that's all I've talked about right now. You know, it's pretty sad looking back at this game because, you know, at the time I thought it was like the worst thing that could happen to U.S. soccer. And then after like a year or two, I was like, man, that might have been the best thing that could have happened to us. And then now I just look back at it and it's just a thing that happened. It wasn't important for us at all. So yeah, hopefully we can really put together a good World Cup. I think the players are going to want to do it. And, you know, let's just try to have some fun with it. That's all I've talked about right now. See ya.